Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sunday, 5 o'clock in California, although time barely exists anymore in my world. And we're here today for a conversation that we're calling Flip the Script. And it's a conversation that's being hosted by me. I'm Zoe Jick from the Oshman Family JCC, Department of Jewish Content. And we're hosting with Tova Birnbaum, who's my colleague here, and Dan Liebenson from jewishLIVE. And all of us are together. This is a conversation hosted by the OFJCC, and it's hosted on jewishLIVE, and it's in partnership with an movement for social change in Israel. And all of these organizations have come together because in this crazy time, it's just the more content we can put out for people, the better. We just want everyone to feel like we're still on Flip the Script. We are going to be talking with Rabbi Denise. So would you say hi?
Hi, so much fun to be with you.
Good. Where are you?
I'm in Toronto, Canada, Eastern time zone here.
Right, it's late where you are already on a Sunday night. And how is your Sunday? How is your Passover so far?
Passover so far has been, like I think everybody else, weird and wonderful. I did, so I'll, maybe as we go through, I'll just introduce myself as I am a rabbi and a mom. So I lead a community online. It's always online, not just now, called Secular Synagogue. And we always do an early Seder. And then for my Toronto community, which I'm the rabbi of, we did a first night Seder. And then I had my family Seder second night. And today I'll start with the Haggadot.com Seder. So I'm sort of Sedered out, if I'm perfectly honest, but they were all awesome in their way. And I'm intermarried, which is something we'll talk about. So today we had an Easter egg hunt with my kids. So that was also part of our Sunday experience.
Wow, you are on like a religious ritual overload during quarantine. That's awesome to hear. Okay, so already there have been so many teasers, even from that short little intro that you gave us, and you gave us a little bit of a clue that we're going to be talking about intermarriage today. But before we get to that topic, I'd love to know who you are and what the secular synagogue is, and you're a rabbi. Tell me what kind of rabbi you are, and give me some sort of intros if you don't mind.
Sure. So I wasn't planning to become a rabbi. I was doing a PhD in literature, and then I was feeling really just uninspired writing a dissertation that people wouldn't read, and I wanted to do work in the world that would make people feel inspired and connected. And that's still what I love about being a rabbi. So I was ordained in 2013 by the humanistic Jewish movement. So some people are familiar and some people maybe not. It's the movement of secular humanistic Judaism. So we do Jewish cultural Judaism, secular Judaism, essentially Judaism for people for whom traditional prayer isn't their way into Jewish practice or isn't meaningful or resonant for them, but they might identify as Jewish, feel connected to culture and community, want holiday celebrations. And so we provide options for those people. And I started Secular Synagogue about a year and a half ago. So it's a completely virtual community. And Dan Liebenson and I have talked quite a lot about that, what it means to run a virtual community and why. But one reason, and I think we're finding that out more now, that lots of things are flipping to online, is that there are times in all of our lives where it's hard to connect with community in person, either because of illness, because you have young children, because of disability, because you're an introvert, because of money, all different kinds of reasons. So I wanted to create a really accessible community, and online means we can connect all over the world together. It's really special and exciting, and it really has been an experiment that worked out beautifully to see that you can have truly connected community where people care about each other and know each other. So that's been really a joy in my life, and I still am really proud to serve my Toronto community also, which is affiliated with the humanistic Jewish movement.
So I'm so happy to hear all these words being thrown around so casually: humanistic, secular, cultural. It's like these are words that mean a lot to me when it comes to my Jewish identity, and to hear someone say them in a way where it just rolls off the tongue is so comforting, because so often I think it's something that we sort of stutter over. And one of the organizations that I'm representing today is called Bina, the Jewish Movement for Social Change. And it's a organization that stands for secular Judaism, but the Israeli version of secular Judaism. And you're in Toronto, which I'll lump in, North America. I'm just lumping it into this general region.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, like, what does that, if you had to, I know this is like the question we all like dread, but if you had to sort of explain a little bit about what secular means to you, could you give us some of, even just like some buzzwords might be helpful?
Sure. So, as I said, it's people for whom prayer might not be their expression of Judaism that's meaningful. And one challenge is that a lot of Jewish life typically, maybe not right now, but typically functions around synagogue. And the main thing synagogues do is prayer services. So there are a lot of people looking for places to go, communities to connect with, Jewish programming and content, but they're like, oh, but I have to be in this space where all these words are being said that I don't believe. So we essentially provide earth-centered and human-centered Passover Seder of prayers thanking God for various things, and instead our blessings are thanking the people who bring forth the bread from the earth, or the matzah, or the people who are at the center of food production, which is particularly important right now. So it just takes the supernatural elements away, but retains a lot of the tradition and cultural practices that people find really meaningful. And so I think a lot of people are like you. They feel like, oh, this has been me, but I always feel like I can't really talk about it. Like it's like a, dirty secret that there are so many secular and cultural Jews out there that actually, like, we're a pretty big chunk of the non-Orthodox Jewish world. And so a lot of my work as a rabbi, I feel like if I have two main missions, one is to say, we don't have to feel apologetic. So many people come up to me and say, I'm a really bad Jew. I don't keep kosher. I don't, like, you're not a bad Jew. You're just a Jew figuring out what ways of being Jewish resonate with you and what's your way in, and you deserve communities that serve you. So that's one. And the other is to champion intermarried and intercultural families, because I think those people also have felt like they have to apologize for who they are. And I'm all about being unapologetic about who we are.
It's so great. It's so like wonderfully exciting to hear someone be able to like speak to this type of Judaism so with so much like clarity and pride. And it's just like so the work you're doing is so important, and there are so many people who I think like you. And so to hear it just voiced without any apology is such like it's a wonderful thing, and the work you're doing is so important. And that leads us, I guess, to the second batch of important work you're doing, which is this work on intermarriage. And you just wrote a book.
I did.
So can you tell us a little bit about your book?
I would love to. It's a bit of a sad time to have a book come out. I'm not going to lie. Launch canceled, tour canceled, or at least postponed. But here's the book, everybody. It's called The A to Z of Intermarriage. So would you mind if I do a super quick screen share just to show people I'm not allowed to do screen share. The host disabled screen sharing. That's fine. But it's published by New Jewish Press, which is an imprint of University of Toronto Press. I'm in Toronto, and this is what it looks like. It's available through Amazon or anywhere you buy books, both as Kindle edition and as a paperback. And yeah, I wrote the book for similar reasons to what we're talking about. When I was young, growing up in Jewish community, everything I heard about intermarriage was really, really negative. And I wanted to flip the script. I wanted to say, you know what? We no longer have to ask ourselves what will happen when so many people, marry across culture and religion. We know what's happening because it's been happening now for decades, and we have the demographic data to tell us what's happening. And it's not the crisis that people imagined it to be. In fact, there's some really positive things happening as a result of intermarriage. So I wanted to write that book that talks about that for the Jewish community, and also especially for couples and families, maybe who are figuring out how to be intermarried, or whose parents might be worried about it. So it's also a bit of a how-to guide.
I have already, like, even from just that little primer that you just gave us, I already have like, so I could, any one sentence that you just said, I could have just, we can just go from there and have a whole conversation. But before we get into the sort of meat of the conversation, and we'll get into the content, even with just the little teasers you gave us, would you mind just reading maybe like the opening page and a half of the intro so that we all get a little bit of a flavor of it?
Of course. So it starts, when I was a teen, I attended a talk called The Disaster of Intermarriage. I feel like pretty much everyone who's on this Zoom attended that talk or something like that, you know. At the time, I remember seriously wrestling with the idea that if I married someone who wasn't Jewish, I'd be giving up my identity. I also, however, had a tinge of feeling that this was in some way racism or xenophobia. Couldn't you be both proudly Jewish and open to creating a family with someone who wasn't Jewish? There are many thousands of intermarried Jews in North America, and most of whom are raising children Jewishly, practicing Judaism in some way, and participating in Jewish community. Yet the narrative of intermarriage as disaster remains firmly in place. So why a reference guide to intermarriage? There's really no how-to guide for marriage or for life. Compendium of story, a coming together of religious source material, cultural context, personal narrative, and learning I've done along the way. I think it's important to say, I'll just pause, because I'm intermarried myself as a rabbi. Most of the couples I serve are intermarried themselves. I officiate a lot of intermarriage weddings, and so I had a lot of that countered the traditional narrative. So that's why I wanted to write the book. I'm a believer in the power of intermarriage. I think it's healthy for individuals and families to experience and express pride in who they are, in the diversity and divergence that makes them, or us, who they or we are. I believe intermarriage can be a positive and healthy making force for Jews, Jewish families, and Jewish communities. Judaism has traditionally, even rejecting folks who want to join in Jewish activities and groups, all while worrying about Jewish population numbers and the decline of communities. I've often found that there are two parallel threads completely in contradiction with one another in Jewish life. The first is, oy vey, there aren't enough Jews. And the second is, you aren't Jewish enough, so-and-so isn't Jewish enough, let's keep really tight boundaries to keep all these others out. And I get it, we're a minority, and minorities have felt and continue to feel under threat. Many people talk about assimilation as the greatest threat Judaism has ever known, and they're not wrong. But the anti-intermarriage narrative only intensifies that threat. When our Jewish community is insular and closed-minded, many of its members will choose to leave. No one is itching to join a club that doesn't respect their families and values. And many Jews today welcome universality and equality and celebrate justice and openness. So that's a little bit of the introduction.
It's so great to hear it in your own voice, because you write, even when I read the introduction, even knowing you just a little bit, like, it's so clearly your book, and to hear it read in your voice is so wonderful and so exciting. And congratulations on writing such an important book, for adding it to our bookshelf. But that being said, this is not just your book. This comes in like a much greater context. So before we dive into the personal story of how you came to write this book and sort of why you became so passionate and what you wanted to contribute, can you just like orient us? Can you give us like a little bit of a, why is intermarriage so charged, a little bit of a history of intermarriage, and what were you responding to?
Yeah, so I was responding to that, workshop I went to. Wherever I went, everybody's saying how horrible intermarriage will be for Jewish continuity. This will be the end of Judaism. But it wasn't my experience. And I was sick of hearing that same narrative. It was depressing. The other piece, especially as a rabbi, but also as somebody who is an active participant in Jewish life, including going to, Jewish film festivals and book talks and whatever, my local JCC, etc. I felt like the more we focus on intermarriage as a problem, the less we're actually doing good Judaism. I was like, this is a boring, tired, uninspiring narrative. And Judaism is so rich. So why don't we focus on the good stuff? And that will bring people to our Jewish spaces and make them want to connect.
Wait, but it's
So
not like Jews to not kvetch. We're such kvetchers.
look, there's always going to be stuff to kvetch about, right? Look, we have so much to kvetch about in this cultural moment. It's perfect, right? You don't need to go looking for more stuff. Um, and I really feel like our families were being so hurt. I was just on in Canada we have the CBC, sort of like the BBC in Britain, and I was just on one of their shows this week, and the host is somebody who married. She's not Jewish herself, and she married someone Jewish, and she said, we could not find a rabbi to marry us. And I said, I'm so sorry. You were celebrating your union and you were wanting to do it in a Jewish way, and we kept you out. Like, who's that serving? That's not serving Jewish continuity. That's what I was responding to. And also responding to demographic data, certainly starting with the 2013 Pew survey on American Jewish life, but also other demographic data we have recently. There was a big population study in Canada last year that had similar results that said the majority of people who are intermarrying are raising kids with Jewish identity. Like, it's the opposite of what we heard would happen. And yet the narrative hasn't changed. So when people are still talking in that narrative, they're not responding to reality. So the book's a bit of a reality check, and also really about pride, as I said, about people feeling proud of who they are, proud of who they're in partnership with. And I want us to celebrate who we are and celebrate those families that have been excluded previously.
Right. And obviously this is not just a reality check that you had heard about, but it's one that hits really close to home, and it's pride that you actually feel, and it's families that you're not just serving, but that you're a part of that community yourself. So obviously this is coming from your own personal experience, which adds a certain, integrity to the project. And I would love for you to tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit about your own personal story and what brought you to be so passionate and invested in this topic.
Sure. So, I mean, I have to say I was pretty lucky in the sense that my family was relatively open, and so was my partner's family. We've been together a long time now, almost 15 years, and it really wasn't the drama that sometimes people expect. And that's also in the book. Like, it doesn't have to be the crisis. And I was already part of the secular humanistic Jewish movement, which has always been cool with intermarriage. So unlike in other movements where if you want to become a rabbi and your partner isn't Jewish, that's like a huge deal. That wasn't a huge deal. So I feel like I'm already sort of post-crisis of intermarriage in my own life. Having said that, one of the funny things that happens when you're a champion of intermarriage is you feel like you can't be honest when there are bumps in the road or hiccups. And so I felt like even amongst my rabbinic colleagues, I'd be like, if you want to put Christmas lights up on your house, and they were all like, we celebrate intermarriage, it's awesome. And I'm like, no, but we can also have the conversations about where it's sticky, that's part of it. So I wrote the book just for people to have modeling. I think it's very important. We didn't grow up, none of us grew up with rabbis who were intermarried, exclusively. So there's very little modeling. And I feel like that can be a role for me where I can talk about how you live like this. Not everybody has to make the choices I made, obviously. It's not like this is a complete how-to, but it is about, how I've broached these subjects in my marriage and helped other couples through some of the tough conversations they might have to have. And also how we can all do it with a little bit more joy.
Yeah, I'm struck by how you're wearing two hats in this project. How you're wearing the Rabbi Denise hat and you're wearing the Denise the wife hat. And I'm wondering like how you were able to differentiate which voice you wanted to take at different moments in the book, and also like what it meant to you to be putting the stamp rabbi as your byline.
Um, Well, it's funny. I really didn't think about it as two hats because I'm just me, like,
You're not a
um,
rabbi at home, you know?
right. I suppose that's true. I don't know. I will say, because I was already with Charlie, who's my husband, my partner. Um, when I was in grad school, before I was in rabbinic school, I wasn't planning to become a rabbi. And so people, when I was writing the book, were like, "Oh yeah, what was that like? Was he like, whoa, I'm going to be married to a rabbi?" And I was like, "No, he knew I was super, into being Jewish and doing Jewish stuff, and it was just pretty smooth. He was like, yeah, of course you should become a rabbi, Um, the thing is, in the book, I talk a lot about how, in a way, all marriages are intermarriages. And I'll explain what I mean, because I know sometimes people
I
find that
loved this
concept.
part of the book, by the way.
So I know some people are like, what? That's not true. But look, for me, to be married to an atheist who celebrates Christmas in a very secular way and does an Easter egg hunt with our kids on Easter, so we have chocolate, and that's like it. Um, that's much easier to negotiate than it would be for me as a cultural secular Jew to be married to even a very observant reform or conservative Jew, let alone Orthodox, right? I don't keep kosher in my house. There are a lot of Jewish laws and customs that I don't practice. And much more importantly to me than what I don't do is what I do value. And in the book, it's all alphabetical. So I say, like, V is for values, and start there. My values are about justice and equity and, feminism. And um, to be with a partner who is in line with those values is way less of an intermarriage for me than being with somebody who doesn't celebrate the same holidays as me. So, my marriage is an intermarriage, but it's not as much of an intermarriage as it could be if I was in a Jewish union. And in the book, one of the people I talk about, she's awesome, like a member of secular synagogue and just such a cool person. And I think she's okay with me talking about her marriage, but she's married to somebody. So she's a secular cultural Jew like me, and she's married to somebody who's deeply observant and leads like a traditional egalitarian
Way
community.
harder, way
Way
harder
harder,
to navigate, way harder to navigate.
way harder. And she's like, we are in an intermarriage. What Denise does is nothing, like this is what an intermarriage is. We have so much to figure out. And
Right.
I think that no matter who you're, like, if you're going to be, and it doesn't have to be marriage, we talk about intermarriage, but in terms of long-term partnerships, whether or not you choose to actually get married, um, you're always going to have stuff you come up against that you disagree with, right? Every partnership has their fault lines, their points of negotiation, their points of difference. You simply did not marry somebody who's exactly like you. And if you did, that's, weird. And also that would probably also be very annoying. I feel like it would be annoying to live with yourself. So
Right.
everybody has to figure out their stuff. And
This was actually, you're kind of touching on the main feeling that I had when I read your book, and I hope you won't mind my saying, which is that the main experience I had reading your book is like, oh, this is an A to Z guide to marriage.
mhm,
And so, like, you're basically saying, like, this is how you have a happy, healthy, successful marriage that's full of communication and compromise. So, I guess one of the things that is still left for me as a question is like, what if you still need to get over that theological hurdle? Like, what if you still need to get over that jump that makes intermarriage acceptable, and then you're willing to work on the marriage, and then the guide is very helpful? But what about that first jump that you have to make where you're okay with it theologically and intellectually and, I don't know, emotionally, psychologically?
yeah, I think it truly depends. So there are some people who, like, it's not going to work for them, right? If you're somebody, for example, who has a deep belief that, Jesus is the Messiah, and when Easter comes around, happy Easter to those celebrating, Easter comes around,
Great
you want
timing.
to mark
Great
that by.
timing. It's like Pesach week and Easter coinciding is just a great time for this conversation.
That's why I thought we were having it today. It's the perfect time, right? It's past Easter. A lot of people are doing both, or Eastover, some say. Um, and yeah, if it's important to you that your whole family goes to church and your whole family shares that belief, like, you probably aren't going to marry somebody who's Jewish and can't accept that belief, right? So not all unions are possible. So some people can get over that theological hurdle, and some people can't and don't want to, and that's fine. But in my experience, there are a lot of people who are secular across, whatever religion or culture they grew up with. The people I serve are mainly secular, and those theological hurdles aren't a huge deal in their lives. So if that's you, then it's probably not a huge jump to get over. What I recommend in the book, what I recommend when I work with couples is, make a list of your I absolutely have to have this, like if I don't get to light Hanukkah candles, if I don't get to do a full Seder, if I don't get to go to church on Easter, if I don't get to celebrate, mark Ramadan with fasting whatever your things are, list them.
Yeah.
And then share your list with your partner and see if there are any that they're absolutely not.
I think
you have those.
You're really clarifying for me what I think was a process of reading 40, 60 pages into the book for me, because it was I think I came to it with the bias that I predict a lot of your readers will come to, which is that I assumed I was going to be reading the case for intermarriage, or how to make yourself comfortable with intermarriage. And I think that comes from our own bias in the way that we talk about intermarriage in the North American Jewish community. But what I realized a few pages, tens of pages into it, was oh no, this is a book for people who are already doing it, and this is an A to Z guide, right? This is a how-to guide. It's took me a while because my own assumptions were clouding my vision.
Yeah, I think there's different parts for different folks. So I have G is for grandparents, and that comes from a lot of experience working with couples who have a parent who's not on board, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So the couple is chill with each other and they don't have any worries about this union, but a parent does. So I talk about that in the book. So, different parts might resonate differently for different folks, but yeah, my starting point is we've had the crisis of intermarriage conversation. Right. We don't need to have that conversation. That conversation is tired. Let's just get to the part where we know that people are in these relationships and families and the children of these relationships and families, and let's make a book for them.
Right. It's great. It's so important. Okay. Let's just talk a little bit about the research, the writing. What did you know you wanted to get in there? What was big question marks? What did you feel you weren't qualified to talk about until you read every book on the topic? Tell me about what you had to do to get ready to write this book.
Well, I did read just about every book on the topic, and some are awesome. I super recommend the work of Karen McGinnity, whose work on gender and intermarriage is so important. I'm a big fan of Beyond Chrismica. There are a lot of really cool books out there. And I would say, and this is not a criticism, but it's just how it is, a lot of those books are pretty academic. And that's just not it's not the kind of book that everybody is going to want to pick up and read through a lot of stats and that.
Oh, you don't say.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not criticizing those books. Those books matter. Those books are really, really important. But that's not my book. My book is meant to be much more of a, casual conversation. I'm really glad, Zoe, that you say it sounds like my voice, because I was really deliberate about that. I wanted to sound like a person talking and not a researcher conveying research in an objective way. I'm not objective about this topic. I'm not going to pretend to be. So, so that book wasn't available. There was no real how-to guide. There are cool books like the Intermarriage Handbook, but again, they're a little bit more clinical. And there's awesome resources. I recommend that book to some of my couples, but it wasn't the book I needed in my personal life. And it wasn't the book that a lot of my couples needed. I felt like they needed a book that really, part of what I like about it being alphabetical is you can flip around, okay, we're dealing with Chrismica, let's flip to that section. Okay, we're dealing with an in-law issue. Okay, circumcision. Whoa, you can just flip to that and get there. And there's some advice.
I know the poor C's are so stacked. You have children and circumcision in the C's. It's just that letter is so weighty.
Yeah, there was a lot in C. It was a long second. My editor was like, "What are we going to do about this letter? It's too long." So,
you already mentioned G for grandparents,
right?
And I already told you that G was my favorite section of the book because you skip right from gefilte fish to God, And so if you would, could you give us like a little bit of a taste? Could you read us Gefilte Fish and God?
Sure. So it's fully alphabetical. So any pairings next to each other are the fault of the alphabet, and not because I
I
was
think there
trying to.
is one thing in between Gefilte Fish and God,
It
technically.
goes gefilte fish, giving, and then God.
But I loved it because I was reading it and I was like, wow, the G's perfectly encapsulate that this issue spans like the absolute everyday to the absolute biggest topic you could possibly imagine, like gefilte fish and God.
Let's do it. It's so funny because I'll just say that one of the lines in gefilte fish, I'll read this section in a second, but one of the lines is gefilte fish is a reminder that some traditions are good to let go of. And my publisher liked it and excerpted it on one of the ads for the book. And people went like, gefilte fish is like the hot button issue here. They were like, I love gefilte fish. How dare you? So apologies to people who love gefilte fish in advance. But I wrote, gefilte fish is one of those things that are fun for intermarried people to explore. This is fish that is not cooked, often comes in scary looking jars at the deli. And here is the secret revealed. Sure, some people like it. Hi, Mom. But more people feel that they have to have it at their holiday dinners, even though it is gross. Gefilte fish is a reminder that some traditions are good to let go of. You decide which ones. Having said that, there are some people who throw the book across the room as they read this. Some people love gefilte fish. What's the lesson? No one is right. You can take something Jewish and have wildly diverging opinions on it. And same with something from any other culture. Some things you feel like you have to have, and some things you're ready to let go of. You and your partner decide. And if your partner likes gefilte fish, buy it, set it on the holiday table, but don't feel like you have to eat it. And there's sort of, it's a metaphor also for like, you know, in my relationship, there are things that Charlie is super happy to participate in. You know, he loves being part of the Seder. He loves being part of Hanukkah. He loves coming to the services I lead because they're fully secular and resonate with him. And there are some things that he doesn't do. He's not going to study Torah. That's fine. You know, we are two different people in a relationship. We are not, we don't have to do and love all exactly the same things, right? And that's true in any relationship. So in giving, right after that, I talked about give and take, but you wanted me to get to God. And this is where I do say one of the contentions of this book is that all marriages are intermarriages. And as we were working on this book, my editor heard this doozy from someone. A couple was preparing for their child's B mitzvah. That's a gender neutral way of talking about the coming of age ritual we have. The father was a Shabbat keeping conservative Jew who wanted traditional liturgy. The mother was skeptical of the language of prayer, was raised Reform, but essentially was a humanist and secular Jew. And they couldn't agree on how to approach the B mitzvah. So even in marriages in which both partners are Jewish, we still find intermarriages. And so again, I talk about, you know, me and Charlie as an example of people who maybe aren't as intermarried as a Jewish union. So I'll skip that part. But here's where I talk about theology a bit. Do both partners believe in God? If so, which kind? Is it a God who answers personal prayers? Some energy that's the source of life? No God at all? And those are the conversations I encourage people to have. These conversations really make the difference in terms of which rituals are included. For some people, agreeing about belief is much more important than celebrating certain holidays. For others, belief has nothing to do with their cultural expression. So I just think everybody should have those conversations, figure out what beliefs they share, and move from there. And then I move on to the next G, which is goodness, because a lot of the God conversations really I find are about goodness. For most of my couples, it turns out they don't have to agree on whether they believe in God. They do have to agree on what expressions of goodness go on in the home. And, you know, what are your values? How will they be practiced? Will things be equal? How will we share responsibility? What is our parenting style going to be? Those things, I often think is the central question. Think about that for yourselves. What really matters? And for a lot of people I work with, it's what they do that matters.
Yeah, I loved that section when I was reading through. I loved that you went from gefilte fish to God. I thought it was just so funny. And I thought it also like really shone a light on the fact that that deciding to like make an intermarriage work, deciding to be committed to that means that you're dealing with like these very small issues and these very big issues. And the book really covers both. And I'm curious whether that's a range that you see playing out in your marriage, if it's a range that you try to prepare couples to anticipate. I'm wondering like whether that's sort of the big sociological theological issues that you cover in the book and the very small everyday conflicts that a couple faces that you cover in the book. I'm wondering whether that range feels true to real life to you and where you see it playing out, I guess.
Um, Yeah, in some ways it does. I think for most of the couples I work with, earlier you asked what was my process. I really wanted to spotlight some of the families I've worked with. So you get to hear about like, how we did, the Hindu Jewish wedding and what are some of those shared cultural symbols that we can bring together and how beautiful that can be. So you get to hear some of those just real life stories. And so, that's where it plays out for people because most people, especially now, if you're, in a committed relationship with somebody, you have had some of those conversations, right? You've figured out there's some kind of compatibility. So a lot of the day-to-day stuff is pretty smooth. And a lot of those big theological questions actually are also pretty smooth for a lot of people. I think it's the big moments, like for example, life cycle things like, oh, who's going to officiate our wedding and what's the ceremony going to include, or are we going to circumcise our child, or how are we going to do holiday celebrations, particularly for a lot of people it's like the December questions, right? But not exclusively. Sometimes it's other holidays, right? The book is not just about people who marry across Christian Jewish cultures. It could be more broad than that. So people have to figure out, I think it's not so much the day-to-day and it's not so much the theological stuff. It's the like, oh, there's this like event and how is that handled? And that's one of the things I remind people about, that if you're stressing about your wedding ceremony, for example, keep your eye on the prize of the marriage, right? Your wedding is a deeply significant day. It's beautiful. It should mean, your ceremony should be truly meaningful and true to your values. And it's one day. And don't sacrifice the marriage for the sake of the wedding you want to have.
Can you tell us maybe one thing that surprised you during your research and your writing experience? Something you didn't anticipate, whether it's an idea that you encountered or whether it's a personal transformation that you experienced while writing? Anything that was unexpected as you wrote the book?
You know what? It's so funny that you asked that question right now. Just as somebody posted in the chat, not to be so this person, thank you for writing, wrote not to be apologetic about being secular resonates strongly with me. How many of us are out there? Any numbers? We don't have a lot of numbers because it's a question that's rarely asked on sociological surveys. I wish we had numbers. And even something like the Pew study, which sort of gets at numbers because it traces Jews by religion and Jews by ancestry. There's a lot of, which I won't go into, like research about why those questions didn't maybe track who's really living as a secular and cultural Jew. I would say there are millions of us. And so to answer your question, Zoe, the thing that surprised me a little bit was that part about like the deep hunger for people to see themselves reflected and not have to be apologetic. The deep, how many people have said to me, like, I've always felt like this is my relationship is something that like isn't quite right, or I should have to hide it. And even if we're proud about who we are and we don't care what others think, like I feel like I can't talk about it in Jewish spaces. Like that has been the biggest surprise. Like, oh, there was a real desire for people to have it voiced. Like my relationship is just fine, and this is how we do it.
What a machaya, like what a life-giving thing to be writing a book and feel like, oh, I'm not speaking into a void. Like I feel buttressed by the fact that I have people who really, really, really need my content. What an amazing, unique book writing experience you had.
It's been fun. And I think it's okay to say like my editor was somebody who was like, you know, you're really convincing me. Like, I grew up in a much more traditionally Jewish context, and like this is, so that was really cool. And then the copy editor, who like I never even met actually in person, but she wrote to me after and she said, you know, I'm intermarried and your book was really deeply meaningful for me. It was so much fun to get to work on it. And I was like, this is what I mean. There are so many of us out there. And there isn't a lot that speaks to our experience. So it's nice to be able to be in conversation with people.
Yashir Koach. I have one more question for you, and then we can take questions from folks who are here, and we can wrap it up. But this is, you know, an opportunity for you to say whatever you want, or to give us a sort of like well wish as we think about your book. But what do you hope for the North American Jewish community when it comes to intermarriage in the future? And I, you know, even stumble as I say it, because it's like, do you even want it to be called intermarriage anymore?
It's so tricky as a word because a lot of people, first of all, are not married, and I want them to feel included. So there's that. Some people say interfaith marriage, but like I serve people who don't see themselves as faith people, so that's complicated. So there isn't a great word for it. I would love for there to be a great word for it, but my main wish is really that we stop causing all that pain in the Jewish world, where no one, you know, forevermore needs to, you know, humbly say to a rabbi, I can't tell you how many, and like if you look at my website, my social media, like it should be clear I'm cool with intermarriage, right? But still I get messages all the time like, so I'm marrying someone who's not Jewish, is that okay? Would you do the wedding? You know, that apologizing. And I always say, you know, and this is true for any rabbi or any kind of officiant, clergy, anyone, if somebody tells you I'm getting married, the first thing you say should be Mazel Tov or congratulations, and not is your partner Jewish? You know what I mean? Like, I think we really have caused a lot of harm, making people feel excluded and unwelcome. And that includes even after people are married and we say, you know, and I, you know, like I realize that different Jewish movements have their rules, and I respect that. They're allowed to have their rules, but we can also acknowledge that it's painful when someone isn't allowed to participate in their child's bar mitzvah or isn't allowed to be a full member of that community, and it keeps people away. I would love for that to change, and I would love for no teenager ever again to have to go to a crisis of intermarriage or a disaster of intermarriage talk like I had when I was a teen. I would love for us to just move past it and get to the business of doing good Judaism, like you're doing, Zoe, you know, meaningful ways for people to connect with our texts and traditions and celebrations and, you know, programs without this being a central question. That's what I would love.
Amen. I want to leave the last 15 minutes of our time slot to just answer any questions. And I know I see here in the chat that Dee has given you 3 things to respond to, so you can read them, or I can read them and you respond. But I'm gonna sort of put myself on the back burner for a little bit so that you can answer questions from folks who are here with us. And then when we finish, we finish.
Okay. So Dee wrote, there are 3 things, I'll try to touch on them. For my own case, a desire to try to honor rituals and traditions without entirely to make something new or contrived versus being shunned or rejected. Yeah, as un-Jewish. So look, the beautiful thing is that there is a lot of choice right now in the Jewish world. And so find this, I talk about this a lot in the book, C for community, and elsewhere in the book I say, find your community, find the people who will fully welcome you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's stuff out there. I'm part of the, you know, secular humanistic Jewish movement, which I recognize is not for everybody. We've been around over 50 years. There's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of people doing good work. And, you know, Dan will be happy if I say a lot of it's online now. So even if where you live doesn't have an in-person community where you feel comfortable, you can connect. It's one of the reasons I started Secular Synagogue, was so that people could find a community if they didn't have one where they live. Reason number 2 from D is resources for deep dives with Eastern faith intermarriage. Yeah, so I don't have as much experience, but there is cool stuff out there. In the book, I tell a story about this great, at this time of year, a couple of years ago, this great baby naming I did. And it was representing Jewish and Christian and Bengali traditions, all in one baby naming ceremony. And it was around this time of year. So it was, Passover, Easter, and also the New Year celebration that the Bengali community was celebrating. So it was so nice to see how all those things can come together. And I'm not like an expert on Eastern religion and philosophy, so I don't know all the resonances, but in my work, working with people to create ceremonies, there are overlaps. So I encourage you to explore that further if that's relevant to you. I think there's probably some beautiful stuff there. And number 3, even if we understand our religions at home as best we can, how to forge this path with shared experience with our children. Yeah, so you're saying it sometimes feels lonely where we can't expect traditional forums like Hebrew school or Sunday school teachers to understand and share the nuance of our personal path at home. And there again, I would say, find a place that does. The Sunday school of the congregation I serve in Toronto, it's called Orinu Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. Sizable chunk of our families are intermarried. And there is no drama if a child, when making their Hanukkah card, puts a Christmas tree on it. It's fine. And I think that you deserve to find leadership and teachers and the people who you want to, work with your family who will understand how you're doing it. So I would say have a conversation and see if they're on board. And if they're not on board, find someone who is. There are a lot of choices out there right now. Yes, and you're welcome. Thank you. And I don't know if there are other questions on Facebook, or I know we have platforms going, so I know our hosts might let me know if there are other questions or comments.
Folks can speak up if they have any more comments, and otherwise we will say thank you to Rabbi Denise. And when is tell us about your book coming out, and when can we get it? How can we get it?
Okay, so the book is out. Sadly, it was supposed to launch, now, and our launch events in March were obviously canceled. I was supposed to tour it in May. So it's all sort of a little bit to be seen how it's going to unfold, but I would be delighted if people wanted to check out the book. It's available from the University of Toronto press site. It's also up on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like anywhere you probably typically buy books. It's available as a Kindle edition as well as paperback, and it's on sale right now, actually. So if you feel like checking it out while you're home more, then that would be great. And if people want to follow me on social media, it's at Rabbi Denise at Instagram and Twitter, and Rabbi Denise Handlarski on Facebook. And you can always find me at secularsynagogue.com. Then that's where I'll post information about when it tours. Obviously, I don't know how that's all going to unfold right now, but that's how you stay in touch with me if you want to be part of it, and I would love that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and we wish you just like the best of luck with the book and with all your work, and may your marriage go from A to Z in your lifetime as well.
Thank you so much. This was a really great conversation. I'm really grateful to you, Zoe, and to all of the players who put this together. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Zoe, now that we already have a stage, can you tell everyone about the writings?
Oh, I would love to. We are hosting Jewish Learning every Wednesday night, starting April 22nd for 6 weeks. It basically takes us almost to Shavuot, and who knows where we'll be in quarantine by then, but 6 weeks from April 22nd, every Wednesday from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in California time. And we are going to be covering in 6 weeks the writings, which is the third section of the Tanakh. And this is for some of you who have learned with us before, who are here, who I can see on the Zoom. you'll know that we did 5 weeks on Torah, we did 6 weeks on Nevi'im, on the prophets, and now we're doing 6 weeks on Ketuvim, on the writings. And Tova and I are going to be tag teaming the teaching, and we're going to be covering some of our favorites, some of the highlights. And you should, within a 6 weeks of this course, get a good sense of what's in the writings. What are the writings all about? This third section of Tanakh that's such a hodgepodge. And of course, you're welcome to just hop in for any 1 week. You don't have to come to all 6. And we will be hosting it on Wednesdays from 7 to 8 California time, starting April 22nd.
Great. Thank you, Zoe, so much. Thank you, Denise. That was really, really eye-opening. And thank you, Dan Libenson, who is leading jewishLIVE and doing amazing work in having an international stage for this amazing content. And thank you, everyone.
Including a weekly show with Denise, I should say.
Fridays at 11 Eastern. It's a little early for California people, but you can have breakfast with us.
But you don't have to watch live. You can watch it recorded on our website.